Frankfurt, July 1856. A knock at the door. It is not a gentle knock. It is the kind of knock that comes from someone who has been standing outside for a long time, deciding whether to knock at all. Clara Schumann opens the door. She's 36 years old. Her hair is pulled back severely. Her eyes are dry, not because she is not in pain, but because she has been in pain for so long that her body has forgotten how to show it. Johannes Brahms is standing in the doorway. He is 23 years old. He has traveled through the night. His coat is dusty. His face is pale. He does not speak immediately. Neither does she. Between them, in the silence, sits everything that has happened in the last 2 years. Her husband committed to an asylum. 7 children. Her career she had abandoned and was only now beginning to reclaim. And this young man, this brilliant, impossible young man, who had appeared in their lives like something neither of them had asked for. Brahms finally speaks. He tells her Robert is dead. Robert Schumann, composer, visionary, her husband of 16 years, died that morning in the asylum at Endenich, without her beside him, because the doctors had kept her away, convinced that her presence would worsen his condition. She had not seen him in 2 years. Clara does not collapse. She does not scream. She steps aside and lets Brahms in. And in that moment, in that extraordinary, terrible moment, you see the entire shape of Clara Schumann's life. A woman who had spent decades holding everything together while the world handed her more weight. A woman who was, by any measure, one of the greatest musicians of the 19th century. And a woman who history would spend the next 100 years almost completely ignoring. This is her story. And it begins, as so many stories do, not with her choices, but with her father's. Leipzig, 1825. Friedrich Wieck has a theory. He believes that musical genius is not born, it is manufactured. He is a piano teacher, a demanding one, methodical, obsessive, convinced that his system, his specific, proprietary method of instruction, can produce virtuosos from raw material. All he needs is the right child. His daughter Clara is 5 years old. She will do. What follows is not a childhood, it is an experiment. Scales before breakfast, exercises until her fingers ache, concerts scheduled, cancelled, rescheduled, travel, hotels, aristocratic salons. Clara's mother had left the family when Clara was 4. There was no one to soften Friedrich's ambitions. No one to say, she is a child, let her rest. At 9 years old, Clara gave her debut concert at the Guander House in Leipzig, one of the most prestigious concert halls in Europe. The audience was stunned, not because a child was performing, but because this particular child played with a depth of expression that most adult performers never achieve. Friedrich watched from the wings. He did not see a daughter. He saw a return on investment. By 11, Clara was touring. By 13, she was performing across Europe. By 15, she was being called the greatest female pianist of her generation. But here is the word that cuts through all of that. Female. Always that word, attached to every compliment like a qualifier, like a ceiling disguised as praise. The greatest female pianist, not one of the greatest pianists. Female. As if the category itself were a limitation, as if the talent lived inside a smaller room simply because of who it belonged to. Clara was composing too, pieces that showed a harmonic sophistication beyond her years. Robert Schumann, the music critic, wrote about her publicly. Her compositions, he said, revealed a talent that most composers, men included, would envy. He meant it as a compliment. He did not yet know he was describing the woman he would marry, or what that marriage would cost her. He was 9 years older than her. When Robert Schumann first appeared in Friedrich Wieck's music room as a student, Clara was a child. By the time she was 16, she was not. Robert was brilliant, erratic, passionate, and entirely unsuited for the stable domestic life that the 19th century expected of a husband. He loved Clara with an intensity that was, depending on the moment, either magnificent or overwhelming. Friedrich Wieck saw what was happening, and he was furious, not because Robert was a bad man, but because Robert was a threat to the machine. Clara performing was income. Clara performing was reputation. Clara performing was Friedrich's proof of concept, his living demonstration that his method worked. A husband meant children. Children meant stops in touring. Stops in touring meant the machine breaking down. Friedrich did everything in his power to prevent the marriage. He spread rumors about Robert's mental instability. He claimed Robert drank excessively. He intercepted letters. He moved Clara across the country to keep them apart. And when none of that worked, he took them to court. In 19th century Germany, a woman needed her father's permission to marry. Clara was 20 years old. She was one of the most celebrated pianists in Europe. She had performed for kings. She had been reviewed by the greatest music critics of her time. And she needed her father's permission to choose her own husband. The court sided with Clara and Robert. They married in September 1840. The day before Clara's 21st birthday, Friedrich Wieck did not attend. He would not speak to his daughter for years. Clara had won. But winning, as she would discover, came with its own complications. Here is something the history books rarely say directly. In the Schumann household, there was an invisible equation. On one side, Robert's composing. On the other side, everything else. The children. And there would be 8 of them, one dying in infancy. The household finances. The social obligations. The correspondence. The management of Robert's increasingly fragile mental state. And Clara's performing career, which was, for long stretches of their marriage, the primary source of income for the family. Robert was not a cruel man. He was not indifferent to Clara's talent. He admired it genuinely. He wrote about it publicly. But he was a man of his time. And his time had very clear ideas about what happened to his woman's ambitions when she became his wife. Clara performed when she could. She composed when the house was quiet, which was rarely. She wrote in her diary with a precision that reads across 2 centuries, like quiet devastation. I once believed that I possessed creative talent, but I have given up this idea. A woman must not desire to compose. There has never yet been one able to do it. Should I expect to be the one? Read that again. One of the most gifted composers of her generation, writing in her private diary, talking herself out of her own talent. Not because she lacked ability, but because the world had spent 20 years telling her, in 100 different ways, that the ability didn't count, that the room she lived in was smaller, that the ceiling was lower, and she had begun to believe it. This is not a story about a villain. Friedrich Wieck was ambitious and controlling, but he believed in her. Robert Schumann loved her and respected her talent. Brahms worshipped her. The system that diminished Clara Schumann had no single face. It was everywhere. In the concert reviews that called her remarkable for a woman, in the expectation that she would manage the household while Robert had uninterrupted hours to compose. In their diary entry, she wrote at 22, that reads like a woman locking a door she would spend the rest of her life pressing her ear against. By 1850, something was changing in Robert. He had always been volatile, swinging between periods of extraordinary creative productivity and dark episodes of depression and anxiety. But now the swings were wider, the dark episodes longer. He heard voices. He reported hearing a single note, A, sustained without pause, for days. He would wake in the night, convinced that angels were dictating music to him, that Schubert's ghost was visiting, that something was entering the room that no one else could see. Clara documented everything, quietly, methodically, the way she did everything. In February 1854, Robert walked to the bridge over the Rhine and jumped. He was rescued by fishermen. The following day, at his own request, he was admitted to the asylum at Endenich. He would never come home. Clara was pregnant with their 8th child. She did not break. This is the part of Clara Schumann's story that stops people who know it. A lesser person, a person without her specific combination of discipline, talent, and sheer structural stubbornness, would have collapsed. Clara performed. 6 weeks after Robert's commitment, with a newborn at home and a husband in an asylum, Clara Schumann went back on stage. Not because she was cold, not because she didn't love him, because there were 8 children, because they were bills, because the stage was the one place where the invisible equation didn't apply, where she was not Robert Schumann's wife, where she was not Friedrich Wieg's product, where she was simply the musician. He appeared in their lives in 1853. Johannes Brahms was 20 years old. He arrived with a letter of introduction from the violinist Joseph Joachim and a portfolio of compositions that made Robert Schumann sit up straight and reach for his pen. Robert wrote an article about him, published in the music journal he edited, declaring that a major new talent had arrived, that Brahms was the future of German music. It was one of the last articles Robert would publish before the breakdown. Brahms came to stay with them, and something complicated began. He was young. She was not young. He was free. She was not free. He admired her playing with an intensity that went far beyond professional respect. Clara was careful. Brahms was not always careful. His letters to her exist. Some of them have been published. Others were burned by Clara herself before she died. What we know is this: when Robert entered the asylum, Brahms did not leave. He stayed in Dusseldorf. He helped manage the household. He helped with the children. He corresponded with the doctors at Endinesh, relaying information to Clara, shielding her from details he thought would break her. He was 20 years old. For 2 years, while Robert was in the asylum, Brahms orbited Clara like a moon that had forgotten it was allowed to leave. And Clara, performing across Europe, managing 8 children, writing letters to a husband she was not allowed to visit, allowed it, because she was human, because she was exhausted, because Brahms was brilliant and present in a life that had become defined by absence. What exactly passed between them is one of music history's most debated questions. Clara burned the letters. Make of that what you will. Robert died on July 29, 1856. Clara had finally been allowed to see him 2 days before the end. He did not recognize her. She buried him. She managed the estate. She organized his manuscripts. She spent the next 40 years performing his music, making sure the world did not forget what Robert Schumann had created, including pieces she had helped shape, including harmonies she had suggested, including compositions that scholars today quietly acknowledge bear her fingerprints, but that carry only his name. Brahms remained in her life, not as a lover, or at least not openly, not clearly, not in any way the historical record can confirm, as the most important friendship of her adult life. They wrote to each other for decades. They critiqued each other's work. They fought, sometimes bitterly. Brahms could be cutting, dismissive, careless with her feelings. Clara could be exacting, withholding, difficult to please. They were, in other words, 2 extraordinary people colliding repeatedly over 40 years. Brahms never married. He dedicated some of his most important works to her. Clara continued to perform Robert's music long after audiences had moved on, long after it was professionally convenient, long after anyone would have blamed her for stopping. Because this is the part of Clara Schumann that gets lost in the romantic narrative, the narrative of the tragic wife, the silenced genius, the woman destroyed by circumstance. Clara Schumann was not destroyed. She was diminished, yes. She was limited, yes. She was forced to compress her talent into spaces smaller than it deserved. But she performed until she was 71 years old. She taught hundreds of students, many of whom became major figures in their own right. She edited the complete works of Robert Schumann with a scholarly precision that defined how his music would be, understood and performed for generations. She shaped the sound of European piano playing in the second half of the 19th century, more than almost any other single figure. She did all of this while raising 7 surviving children, while managing a career with no institutional support, while navigating a world that had very specific ideas about what she was allowed to want. But here is where the story turns into something else. Clara Schumann composed, not as a hobby, not as a pastime, not as the musical equivalent of a parlor trick. She composed with the seriousness of someone who understood exactly what she was doing and exactly what it cost. Her piano concerto in a minor, written when she was 14 years old, is a work of startling sophistication. It was performed, it was praised, and then it disappeared from concert programs for most of the 20th century. Her piano trio in G minor, written at 27, between children, between tours, is considered by modern scholars one of the finest chamber works of the Romantic era. Brahms knew it. He said so. Her songs, the leaders she composed throughout her life, are harmonically adventurous, emotionally precise, and almost entirely absent from the standard repertoire. She stopped composing publicly after Robert's death. The official reason was grief. The more uncomfortable reason is visible in that diary entry she wrote at 22. A woman must not desire to compose. She has spent a lifetime performing other people's music while her own gathered dust. By the time the world might have been ready to hear it, she had already convinced herself it was not worth offering. There is a specific kind of grief that has no public language. Not the grief of death, not the grief of failure. The grief of the thing that never happened. Clara Schumann lived until 1896. She was 76 years old when she died. In her final years, she experienced a series of strokes that gradually took her hearing. A pianist losing her hearing. The echo of Beethoven was not lost on the people around her. She died in Frankfurt. Her students were with her. Her daughter was with her. Brahms received the news by telegram. He traveled to Frankfurt immediately. He arrived in time for the funeral. 6 weeks later, Johannes Brahms was also dead. Liver cancer, diagnosed shortly after Clara's death. Some of his biographers have suggested that the news of her death accelerated his decline. That something essential left him when she left. Whether that is biography or mythology is impossible to say with certainty. What is certain is this: they were bound together for 40 years by something that neither of them ever fully named. And when one of them went, the other followed. For most of the 20th century, Clara Schumann appeared in music history books in one of two ways: as Robert Schumann's wife, or as Brahms' unrequited love. Her compositions were rarely performed. Her pedagogical legacy was acknowledged but not examined. Her influence on the sound of European piano playing was noted in footnotes. The piano concerto she wrote at 14 was not regularly programmed until the 1990s. The piano trio, that work Brahms himself praised, has only recently begun to appear on major concert stages. Her songs are still rarely sung. We are, in other words, still in the process of discovering Clara Schumann. Still in the process of asking, what would she have written if the invisible equation had been different? What would she have written if she had been given the uninterrupted hours that Robert had? What would she have written if the diary entry at 22 had said something different? If she had written, "I have creative talent, and I intend to use it," we don't know. We will never know. And that not knowing, that specific, irretrievable loss, is the real subject of this episode, not Clara Schumann's tragedy. Her tragedy was real, but she survived it. She built something real from the wreckage. The real subject is, how many Claras were there? How many women, in how many centuries, in how many disciplines, sat down at a desk or a piano or a canvas and wrote in their private language, "I must not desire this," and then closed the notebook and never opened it again? The question this episode asked at the beginning was, how many geniuses were forgotten because they didn't fit the expected role? Clara Schumann's answer is complicated. She was not entirely forgotten. She was present, visible, celebrated, but as the wrong thing. Celebrated as a performer when she was also a composer. Celebrated as a wife when she was also an artist. Celebrated as Brahms' muse when she was also quietly his peer. She was seen, just not completely. And the part of her that wasn't seen, the compositions, the harmonic language, the music she wrote and then quietly stopped writing, that part is only now coming into focus. 2 centuries late, with the kind of clarity that only distance makes possible. When you hear her piano concerto, and I hope you will, listen for the 14-year-old who wrote it with the confidence of someone who didn't yet know she was supposed to have doubts, before the world taught her to write diary entries about ceilings, before she learned to make herself smaller, when the music was simply the music, and she was simply the composer. Every episode of the Muse Chronicles asks the same question in a different key. What does it cost to create something that lasts? Clara Schumann spent a lifetime answering that question with her hands on the keys. The bill she paid was invisible. The music she left behind is not. Subscribe to the Muse Chronicles. Next episode, Tchaikovsky, a man who composed masterpieces while living in terror of his own life. Until then,